The operating room lights flicker on, a heartbeat stops, and a legend vanishes forever. In Hollywood, people don't fear death. They fear aging. Have you ever heard about Joan Crawford's private room, where she reportedly underwent one last underground surgery to claw back her youth just before a sudden heart attack wiped away all traces? Or the chilling whispers about the clumsy blade that allegedly sliced through actor Jeff Chandler's artery, turning a routine back operation into a silent massacre. And that's not all. Look at the scene of The Body, Marie McDonald, an overdose, or just a carefully staged performance to mask a catastrophe on the liposuction table. The public was told they died of illness, but the backstage whispers tell a different story. Surgeries promised as healing or youth-preserving were in reality death warrants signed with a scalpel. 10 stars, 10 horrific secrets, and a truth buried deep behind the velvet curtain. Do you dare to face what really happened on those cold operating tables? Let's begin. 1. Joan Crawford, the final contract with youth. In the most brilliant years of the black and white era, the name Joan Crawford was more than just a star. It was a religion. People worshipped her for those hauntingly large eyes and sharp lips looking as though they were carved from precious stone. But there was a truth everyone in Hollywood knew: Joan wasn't just beautiful. She was obsessed with that beauty. She never allowed herself to appear in public without looking like a goddess, even if she was just taking out the trash. However, time is the most ruthless enemy. When wrinkles began to creep across her face, Joan refused to surrender. She entered a life and death struggle to protect the legend that bore her name. It is said that every morning she would plunge her face into a bowl of ice-cold water to tighten her skin and scrub it with pure lemon juice until it burned to whiten it. The height of her extremism was the rumored decision to have all her back teeth removed just to achieve high, hollowed cheekbones, a high-fashion look she believed would keep her eternally young on screen. By the 1970s, as the spotlight began to fade, Joan fell into a state of absolute terror, the fear of being forgotten due to old age. She locked herself in her luxury New York apartment, far from the reach of camera lenses. And this is where the darkest secret began. Although official reports state that Joan died of a heart attack in 1977, chilling rumors still circulate through the Hollywood backstages. It is believed that out of desperation and a refusal to be seen in a hospital, Joan secretly invited plastic surgeons to her home to perform underground procedures. In the dim light of her apartment, far from a sterile operating room, Joan reportedly gambled her life on the stroke of a scalpel to pull back her sagging skin. Tragedy struck when her 70-year-old body could no longer withstand the anesthesia and the brutal invasion of the procedure. Joan passed away right on her own lavish bed, surrounded by cosmetic bottles and photographs from her golden age. She didn't die of natural illness. She died because of her effort to remain immortal in the eyes of her fans. Joan Crawford made one final contract with youth, but the price she paid was her very last breath. Joan Crawford closed the chapter of her life with a haunting pact with the scalpel to protect a shattering illusion of beauty. It was the tragedy of desperation when time had finally run out. However, at the other extreme of Hollywood, there was a woman who didn't need a single plastic surgery to become a legend. She possessed a natural beauty that drove the world mad, yet she found herself on an operating table in a desperate attempt to cling to life at only 26 years old. While Joan Crawford may have died seeking to stay forever young, this woman passed away at the height of her most radiant youth, the original platinum blonde bombshell, Jean Harlow. 2. Jean Harlow, the White Death of the 26-year-old angel. In the history of Hollywood, few deaths have been as shocking and heartbreaking as the passing of Jean Harlow. In the 1930s, Jean was more than just a star. She was a cultural phenomenon. With hair as silver white as liquid metal and a lethal charm, she was the crowned jewel of MGM Studios. The world saw in her a boundless vitality, a radiant future that could light up the entire cinematic capital. But behind those dazzling colored lights, a silent medical tragedy was devouring her from within. In 1937, while filming Saratoga, Jean suddenly fell ill. Her face began to swell, her body grew deathly fatigued, and her breath carried the sharp scent of urine, classic signs that her kidneys had completely shut down. Yet, in an era where medicine was still riddled with gaps, doctors initially misdiagnosed her with a gallbladder infection or a common flu. The tragedy lay in the grim contrast while audiences lined up to see the platinum blonde angel, full of life on screen. In reality, Jean Harlow's body was poisoning itself with unexcreted waste. When doctors finally recognized the severity of her kidney failure, also known as uremia, they decided to perform a desperate emergency surgery. But alas, the operating table that day could bring no miracles. Jean Harlow fell into a coma before the first stroke of the scalpel could even touch her skin. She lay there motionless under the surgical lights, not for a breast augmentation and liposuction, or to claw back her youth, but to seek the most fragile chance at survival. Ultimately, the surgery was never performed. The platinum blonde angel passed away before she could even reach the age of 27, leaving behind an unfinished film and a wave of shock that blanketed all of America. Through the lens of history, Jean Harlow's death is a painful testament to the limitations of 1930s medicine. Back then, antibiotics were not yet common, and dialysis was nothing more than a distant dream. Hollywood could turn a girl into a goddess, but it stood helpless against a disease that we can easily treat today. Jean left while her beauty was still at its absolute peak, turning her into an eternal icon of youth. But the price paid was a life cut far too short. While Jean Harlow was a flower that bloomed early and withered fast, leaving before ever facing the marks of time, our next character is an entirely different story. She lived a full life, surviving all the highs and lows of fame, only for the pride of a legendary sex symbol, to finally succumb to the ruthless laws of the operating table at nearly 90 years old. Let's meet the woman whose curves changed the history of lingerie, Jane Russell. 3. Jane Russell. When a sex symbol faces time. Jane Russell entered Hollywood's Hall of Legends with a physique that was robust and bursting with vitality, a stark contrast to the fragile appearance of other starlets of her era. To mention her name is to immediately recall the woman with lethal curves. The very curves that drove billionaire Howard Hughes to obsessively design a special cantilever bra just for her to wear in the film, The Outlaw, alongside Marilyn Monroe in their iconic partnership. In Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, Jane Russell redefined Hollywood glamour, strong, confident, and seemingly unconquerable by anyone. The biggest difference between Jane and her ill-fated colleagues was her endurance. She lived a full life, surviving all the ebbs and flows of fame to reach the age of 89. She conquered the brutal disposal of the film industry and watched her spotlight shift from a blinding radiance to the soft colors of memory. But in the end, she could not defeat the eventual decay of her own body. In 2011, at nearly 90 years old, Jane Russell had to undergo lung surgery. This was not a cosmetic overhaul to claw back the glory of the past like Joan Crawford, but a genuine medical effort to help her continue to breathe. However, the tragedy on the operating table this time did not stem from vanity, but from the grim reality of biology. No matter if you are a legendary bombshell or an icon of vitality who once shook the screen under the surgical lights, you are simply an elderly patient with tired lungs. The surgery took place, but post-operative complications struck like a storm. The body that was once the desire of millions of men no longer possessed the immune strength to recover. Jane passed away from respiratory failure shortly after. Her death is a somber note, reminding us that while glamour can last forever on film, the human body, even when tended to by the best medical care, still has an irreversible expiration date. Jane Russell's passing closed the era of classical sex symbols. She didn't die because she wanted to be more beautiful. She died because of the finitude of human life on the operating table. A peaceful yet haunting end, proving that even the gods of the screen must eventually bow to the laws of time. The passing of Jane Russell is an ending that perhaps anyone could accept after such a long, storied life. But Hollywood still holds stories that provoke outrage because of their sheer absurdity. Imagine a man at the height of his prime, possessing the rugged charm of a Western star, entering the operating room just to treat a minor backache, only to pay with his life because of a clumsy blade. This was not just an accident, it was the trap of fame, the tragedy of the billionaire gentleman Jeff Chandler. 4. Jeff Chandler. The VIP privilege. Trap. In the 1950s, Jeff Chandler was the very definition of Hollywood masculinity. Standing at 6 feet 4 inches with a rugged physique and prematurely silver hair, he was Universal Studios' golden goose. Chandler was more than just an actor. He was a fierce Western star and a war movie icon who always appeared invincible on screen. However, behind that powerful image lay a medical tragedy that would be written into textbooks as a costly warning about so-called star privilege. It all began with a minor back injury while Chandler was playing baseball, a common accident that could happen to anyone. In 1961, doctors advised him to undergo surgery for a herniated disc so he could return to the set as soon as possible. For someone in peak physical condition like Chandler, this operation was considered a routine, light-as-a-feather procedure. But tragedy struck in the middle of the operation. In a moment of carelessness, the surgeon's blade reportedly veered off course, severing Chandler's main artery. Blood gushed onto the operating table. Despite the surgical team's desperate efforts to plug the leak, the damage was too severe. Chandler's muscular frame was left depleted by massive blood loss and a subsequent severe infection. After several weeks of agonizing struggle, Universal's Man of Steel took his last breath at just 42 years old. Looking back at Jeff Chandler's death, analysts cannot help but ask a bitter question. Did his fame actually kill him? Because Chandler was an A-list star, the studio needed him back at work immediately to protect their multi-million-dollar projects. This pressure likely pushed doctors to choose invasive surgery over a slow but steady conservative treatment. They wanted to create a miracle to bring their star back to the screen as fast as possible, but instead they created a catastrophe. Jeff Chandler's death was a massive shock to Hollywood at the time. It proved that while fame brings you priority privileges, it is that very desire, the urge to do everything fast and perfectly for a VIP that leads to fatal mistakes. A leading man who survived countless fictional battles on screen finally fell to a clumsy blade in real life. Jeff Chandler passed away, due to a medical error while trying to heal his body for his craft. It was a painful occupational accident, but our next story carries a much darker and more dramatic tone. It is no longer a routine surgery, but a desperate race against time to stitch back together a body ravaged by horrific violence at home. Let's look at the tragedy of the Prince of Silent Film, the man who died as doctors tried to pull him back from the brink, Ramon Novarro. 5. Ramon Novarro, the fall of a Latin icon. In the silent film era, Ramon Novarro was the prince in the hearts of millions of women. With his rugged beauty, romantic eyes, and the Latin lover title inherited from the legend Rudolph Valentino Novarro, was MGM's brightest star through masterpieces like Ben-Hur. On screen, he was the embodiment of strength, elegance, and flawless beauty. But in real life, Novarro chose a private existence secluded in his lavish villa in the Hollywood Hills, a place that would later become the scene of one of the bloodiest crimes in cinematic history. In 1968, at the age of 69, Novarro was targeted by 2 intruders intent on extortion. They tortured him brutally for hours, fueled by a false rumor that he hid thousands of dollars in his home. When the police finally found Novarro, he was lying in a pool of blood with fatal injuries to his head and neck. The silent film legend was rushed to emergency care, his life hanging by a thread. At the hospital, doctors immediately performed urgent surgery to stop internal bleeding and reconstruct his severely damaged esophagus. However, this operating table was not a place of healing, but a witness to medicine's helplessness in the face of human cruelty. The surgery failed, not due to the doctor's skills, but because Novarro's body had endured trauma far beyond its limit. He took his last breath right on the operating table, suffocating on his own blood. The contrast between the image of a heroic Ben-Hur atop a war horse and a frail, disfigured man on a surgical table left a deep scar on the heart of Hollywood. Ramon Novarro passed away, leaving behind a bitter message. Sometimes the medical scalpel cannot mend the vast gashes that life so cruelly leaves behind. Ramon Novarro's death was a painful tragedy inflicted by the outside world. But in another dark corner of Hollywood, there was a woman who pushed herself onto the operating table in a desperate attempt to salvage a life that had shattered from within. She wasn't attacked by strangers, she was attacked by the ruthless disposal of the entertainment industry itself. This is the story of a final attempt to pick up the broken pieces of beauty, Barbara Payton. 6. Barbara Payton, surgery to pick up the pieces. The story of Barbara Payton is perhaps the darkest and most socially haunting chapter Hollywood has ever recorded. Once a top-tier rising star of the 1950s, possessing a golden beauty that even smitten the legendary James Cagney, Payton fell into a freefall from the heights of fame to the rock bottom of society in just a few years, fueled by scandals and addiction. By the mid-1960s, once an A-list starlet, Barbara Payton was nothing more than a drifting ghost, forced into prostitution to survive and sleeping on the streets. The radiant beauty she once possessed had been ruthlessly ravaged by alcohol, drugs, and street violence. Yet deep within this miserable woman, a frantic hope still flickered a return to Hollywood, and she believed the only ticket back to that glamorous world was the knife. With a small amount of financial aid, Payton sought out a reconstructive facial surgery in 1967. She yearned for a doctor who could use a scalpel to cut away the years of filth and restore the face of the queen she once was. But tragically, Payton's body at that time was like a crumbling building. Her heart and liver were completely exhausted after years of substance abuse. As soon as the anesthesia took hold, Barbara Payton's tired heart stopped beating forever on the operating table at the age of 39. She didn't die of a simple medical error. She died because of her attempt to use surgery to mask a shattered soul. Payton passed away before she could even see her new face, leaving behind a costly lesson on how Hollywood can drain and discard a human being to the point where they gamble their very life just to be accepted once more. Barbara Payton gambled her life for a chance to return to the screen, but at least the truth of her death was made public. Our next character, however, leads you into a labyrinth of lies and cover-ups. A woman who possessed a physique so perfect she was known as the Body. But behind her death lies a scene staged to hide horrific secrets on the plastic surgery table, Marie McDonald. 7. Marie McDonald, the staged scene and buried secrets. In the history of Hollywood, few have possessed a nickname so objectifying, yet so powerful as Marie McDonald, the woman known to the world as the Body. To the studios, Marie wasn't an actress in need of psychological depth. She was a physical asset. Her fiery beauty and surreal curves made her a leading glamour icon of the 1940s. However, when the world defines you solely by your body, maintaining that body is no longer a choice, it is a matter of survival. In 1965, Marie McDonald passed away at the age of 42. Official records state that she died of a drug overdose at her home. Yet behind that autopsy report lies a wave of chilling rumors that have never faded. Numerous close sources and industry insiders claim that Marie actually breathed her last breath on an operating table during a liposuction and breast enhancement procedure. Procedures that were extremely high risk at the time. Why the secrecy? Simply because Hollywood could not allow a monument of beauty to die in an attempt to surgically alter that very beauty, it was too raw, and it would shame the VIP doctors. There is a theory that after Marie died on the table from anesthesia complications, her body was secretly moved back to her home, and the scene was staged to look like a suicide or an accidental overdose. This cover-up didn't just protect medical reputations, it preserved the last bit of glamour for the studio. Marie McDonald left behind a permanent mystery. Did she die of depression or of a desperate effort to live up to her nickname, The Body? Her death is proof that Hollywood can control a star from the moment they shine until the moment their body is laid to rest, all to ensure the illusion is never shattered. If Marie McDonald died in a labyrinth of cover-ups and calculations, our next character will stun you with the cruel randomness of fate. Sometimes you don't need complex or underground surgeries to face the Grim Reaper. Death can knock on your door while you're doing the most ordinary thing in a place everyone must visit at least once in their lives, the dentist's chair. Let's look at the tragedy of one of Hollywood's most elegant ladies, Constance Bennett. 8. Constance Bennett. The shot from an unexpected place. Constance Bennett was the embodiment of elegance and nobility. She was not only one of the highest-paid stars of the 1930s, but also a sharp businesswoman with an exquisite sense of fashion. On screen, Constance always appeared confident in full command of every situation. She represented the Hollywood elite, those who seemed to have everything and were shielded by the most luxurious living conditions. However, in 1965, an extremely rare event occurred, blurring all boundaries between a superstar and an ordinary person. Constance Bennett walked into a dental clinic for a routine procedure, a medical task that millions of people undergo every day. No one could have guessed that right there in that comfortable dentist's chair, a sudden cerebral hemorrhage would strike. She was rushed to emergency care and underwent immediate brain surgery in a desperate attempt by doctors to save her. However, everything happened too fast. Constance Bennett passed away right on the emergency operating table at the age of 60. What stands out here is the cruel contrast. A woman who lived her entire life in silk and luxury, always controlling the smallest details of her existence, fell to a medical complication so random that no one could intervene in time. The death of Constance Bennett brings a profound lesson about the impermanence of life. In a world full of high-risk plastic surgeries and mysterious underground operations, she passed away from a place that seemed the safest. It serves as a reminder that no matter how powerful, wealthy, or sought-after you are, we are all equal before the scythe of the Grim Reaper. A shot from fate can fire at any moment, even when you are just going for a routine dental checkup. The death of Constance Bennett was a tragic accident, full of regret. But if Bennett was a victim of random risk, our next character was the victim of an inescapable loop of her own making. She was a woman who let the scalpel lead her life from one surgery to the next, only to be eventually drowned in an addiction to painkillers and physical ruin. This is the heartbreaking story of Mary Nolan. 9. Mary Nolan, the infinite loop of the scalpel. If there was ever a soul who was the most pitiable victim of the obsession with perfection, it was Mary Nolan. Once one of the most radiant dancers of the Ziegfeld Follies, and a promising silent film star, Mary possessed a beauty as fragile as crystal. But her tragedy began when toxic relationships and the relentless pressure to maintain her looks pushed her into a horrifying medical labyrinth. Mary Nolan didn't just go under the knife once. She underwent a total of 15 surgeries in a shockingly short period. It began with an attempt to fix scars from a brutal assault, but each procedure gave birth to a new complication, forcing her back onto the operating table for another correction. From a content perspective, Mary was like an old machine being dismantled and reassembled so many times that its internal components finally gave way. The consequence of these 15 surgeries was not just a disfigured face, but a heavy addiction to painkillers, specifically morphine, to cope with post-operative wounds that never seemed to heal. In 1948, Mary passed away in solitude and poverty at the age of 42. She didn't die from one specific operation. She died from the total collapse of her body's systems after years of being tormented by the scalpel. Mary Nolan's story serves as the costliest warning of the addiction to altering identity, a place where one hopes to find safety behind the blade, but instead finds only a bottomless black hole. Mary Nolan was a star who lost herself in massive surgeries to cling to fame. But we often forget that Hollywood isn't just made of A-list superstars with million-dollar tragedies. Behind them are thousands of diligent actors, people who share the same pressure to be perfect just to keep food on the table. Our final character represents that very class, a woman who passed away quietly after a routine surgery, leaving a somber note for the bit part players in the capital of cinema. 10. Inez Courtney, the last breath of the supporting cast. Amidst the sensational headlines of Joan Crawford's passing or the gruesome tragedy of Ramon Novarro, the name Inez Courtney appears with a quiet humility. Inez wasn't the type to make crowds scream as she walked the red carpet. She was a true working actor of the 1930s and 40s. With over 60 roles ranging from witty secretaries to the protagonist's loyal best friend, Inez Courtney was an indispensable gear in the massive machinery of Hollywood. She brought life to every frame, yet that very career of blending into the background placed upon her a silent pressure just as ruthless as any faced by an A-list superstar. In Hollywood, there is an unwritten rule: whether you play the lead or a bit part, your face is your work permit. For someone like Inez, keeping oneself looking fresh and fitting into beauty standards wasn't just about vanity, it was about survival. If a superstar ages, they might get a script specially written about old age. But if a supporting actor loses their look, they are simply replaced by a younger face. It is a silent but relentless disposal. In 1975, Inez Courtney entered the operating room for what reports at the time called a routine medical procedure. In her 70s, after decades of dedication, under stage lights and layers of heavy makeup, Inez likely hoped a standard operation could help maintain her health, or perhaps a bit of her appearance to stay connected to her craft. But that very routine became a cruel destiny. A sudden complication occurred right on the table, and Inez Courtney never woke up to hear another round of applause. Her death created no massive waves of public outcry, no staged crime scenes, and no debates over VIP privileges. Inez passed away as quietly as she had lived and worked. Yet her departure carries a tremendous weight of reality. It proves that death recognizes no hierarchy in Hollywood. Under the cold lights of the operating room, there is no distinction between an A-list star and a B-list player. All are merely fragile bodies trying to defy the laws of nature to serve an illusion called entertainment. From a content creator's perspective, Inez Courtney's story is the final and most vital piece to complete the mosaic of surgical tragedies. It shows the audience that the pressure for perfection is a dark cloud hanging over all of Hollywood, from the highest peaks to the most diligent working class. Inez Courtney didn't die because she wanted to seize the headlines. She died while trying to maintain her existence in a system that worships nothing but the eternity of beauty. The velvet curtain closes after Inez's death, leaving a long silence for the strangers of Hollywood. She passed away, taking with her the last breath of an era where people were willing to trade their lives for just a few perfect moments on screen, even if it was only a small role that no one remembers. 10 stars, 10 brilliant lives, yet all met at the same fateful crossroads, the cold operating table. We've witnessed a Joan Crawford fierce until her very last breath, a Jeff Chandler falling victim to his own privilege, and an Inez Courtney passing away quietly in the shadows of the spotlight. They didn't die because they were weak. They died because of an extraordinary and sometimes desperate effort to remain immortal in the public eye with a flawless image. In Golden Age Hollywood, plastic surgery or medical interventions weren't merely about healing, they were tools to maintain an illusion. But when that illusion shattered under the surgeon's blade, the naked truth emerged. Behind those dazzling films were flesh and blood human beings, with fears and vulnerabilities just like any of us. Glamour may be eternal on celluloid, but the human body remains forever, a finite vessel. The stories of these stars serve as a haunting reminder. The price of perfection is often much higher than we imagine. Which story did you find the most haunting? Or do you believe the theories of the cover-ups behind their deaths? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to dive deeper into these dark corners of Hollywood history with you. If you enjoy mysterious stories and untold truths from the golden age of cinema, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Your support is the motivation for me to keep digging and bringing you even more high-quality content. Thank you for following today's journey.